All right, I call this December 13th Planning Commission meeting to order. The first item, approval of the agenda. Any changes or modifications? Do we have a motion to approve the agenda? Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
All in favor? Excellent. Adoption of the minutes, and I think we have 2 sets of minutes to adopt. Do we have any questions or comments on the first set of minutes from the October 25th special meeting? There's no comments or changes. Do we have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Excellent, that's approved. And then the second set from our November meeting here. Any questions or modifications? All right, hearing none, do we have a motion?
A motion to approve.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor? Excellent. And then new business subdivision Hope's Corner.
Good evening, Marion Ray with York County Planning. Our first item of business here is Hope's Corner. This will sound a little familiar. You've seen the first phase. It came in June and was approved. We are adding another phase to the subdivision here, but we had to come back and do the phases 1 and 2 because there's some overlap between 3 and the first section. So here you can see it's right here on the corner of Mount Gallant and Shiloh, and it's just north of York Highway. You can see it's traditionally cleared. It's been farmland, pasture land. And this is turned, north is to your right, so you got kind of picture it in your head here. The open space there is in the middle of the plat. The new road is there to the left. That is Hope's Corner Drive. So I kind of showed how the overlap, which is why we're here for all of it. Blue is the original Hope's Corner. Red is the new section of Hope's Corner. You can see there's some overlap there. It used to be lot 11, and now it's going to be part of the open space and a few other lots. Go and the open space here. You can see tree save on some of the lots there to the left. There's a path going through the open space as an amenity. There's still the gazebo up in the first phase, and there's going to be a mail kiosk at the end of the new cul-de-sac here that also backs up into the open space. All right, we'll go through our findings here. This site will be serviced by private wells and private septic systems as indicated on the proposed plat. So all the proposed lots meet or exceed the 1 acre minimum lot size by RUD standards. So they will have to have a DHEC permit before we can stamp the final plat for each new lot. Single family is an allowed use. Rural Development District, RUD zoning, does not have a minimum density requirement or maximum density. The development has a density of 0.54 residential units per acre. And the TIA has been completed. And then the development provides adequate street connectivity. The development is partially bounded north and west by the SCDOT maintained roads, Shiloh and Mount Gallant. And it's also a low density style of development, so it doesn't require internal sidewalks. So there is some challenges in order to get true connectivity. Open space and buffers have been provided. The 20% open space is provided and required because it's within the urban services boundary. And a tree survey of the required tree save areas has been completed and accepted by staff. So staff recommends approval of the phase 3, and it's also phase 1 and phase 2 all together of Hope's Corners, total of 63 acres.
Do we have any questions of staff? Okay, no questions. Do we have a motion?
I make a motion to approve according to staff recommendations.
And do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? All right, that passes. Item 2, Edmonds Farm.
Our second preliminary plat tonight and final preliminary plat is Edmonds Farm. This is over just west of Clover off Hines Road. You can see 321 there to the right. The area has been traditionally cleared, pasture land, and undisturbed area. The little panhandle area over to the left is part of Allison Creek and some other streams. It's all wetland flood zone area. It's 123 acres. They have 14.9 acres of open space and 20 acres of tree save. And they're requesting 62 lots here. We can go through our findings here. And you can see there to the left, it's going to be open space. There's also split zoning on this parcel. It's a little bit unusual. The area that the lots are on is RUD, which is the 1 acre lot size. The area to the left in the panhandle are zoned AGC. It will not be able to be further subdivided as part of the preliminary plat, and quite frankly, it's not very buildable. Not unless you want to do a lot of stilts. And here is the open space tree save area. It is not required. Open space is not required. It's outside the urban services boundary, but it has been provided. Findings here. Site will be serviced by private wells and private septic systems as indicated on the proposed plat. Again, it's a 1 acre lot size. It's less than 2 acres. So each lot will have to have a DHEC permit before we can stamp the plat. Single family residential is an allowed use, is RUD development again, and it doesn't have the density requirement, but this one is a density of 0.5 residential units per acre. Again, a TIA has been completed and has been included in your packet. And for the street connectivity and pedestrian facilities, the development is accessed from Hines Road exclusively and maintained by the SCDO, which is maintained by SCDOT. The site is bounded on 3 sides by other residential developments, and the 4th side is that large floodplain. And because of the size of the lots and the road frontages, the development does not require sidewalks. The 20% open space is not required due to the outside of the urban services boundary, but it has been provided. They're going to provide 14.9 acres of open space. And the tree save areas in total include 25% of the project, but a tree survey is not required. They have to have tree save, but a survey is not required due to being outside the urban services boundary. But they did save 25% of the trees as shown on the plat. And that's in the open space areas and along the kind of a buffer along the edges of the subdivision. I'll go back to the plat here. Staff does recommend approval. And if you have any questions.
Are there any questions of staff?
On the TIA, it says difference in level of service from no build to build conditions in 2026. What's the significance of 2026 in that?
Could you repeat the question one more time?
So on the TIA, it's page 22 in the packet. It says difference in level of service from no build to build conditions in 2026. What significance is 2026 to that year?
That's their build out, complete build out.
Okay, for the actual subdivision. Okay.
Correct.
And then and so the eastbound lane for Lawrence Road, that's a level of service F in the AM and PM there. And then so mitigation for them on the next page. There's other developments that have contributed. Do we know how much money, I guess, it takes total until that gets fixed so that would increase the level of service to a higher rating?
So this is based off the cost estimate of $174,000. So that's pretty much what we're striving for. So
Okay.
In the very bottom, I have the other that have chipped in already.
Okay.
Any further questions of staff? Okay, do we have a motion? I'll make a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor? All right, that looks unanimous. On to item 3, rezoning 21-02.
evening, everybody. This evening, we had a rezoning application here, 2102 for Sheldon Brown at 5001 West Liberty Highway in York, tax map number 555-00000044. The request for this evening is to zone a parcel of 1.93 square acres from RC2 to BD1. The purpose is to bring a non-conforming baseball training facility into conformance with the actual zoning code. This is brought to us by a complaint from a neighbor, and so we looked into it, and sure enough, it was not zoned properly for what they're doing at that location. The property is at the intersection of Hansmill Highway 274 and West Liberty Hill. As you can see by the aerial image here, these are all in your package. It began with the house, and then over the years, he's expanded and added more buildings, more storage buildings, a batting cage, a batting facility, as well as an actual small little diamond there. Environmental, there's nothing really here of issue for environmental. The zoning map, the current property is zoned RC2. Everything from the area here is also zoned RC2. The nearest BD1 is further up north on Hansmill Highway. The land use plan in the area here is showing this being single-family residential for the entire area here. According to the comprehensive plan, this shows here to stay as a single-family residential, which allows for low-density housing. You can have some small commercial if it's located at the intersection of two major roads, or if it's near existing commercial uses. So for staff, we are recommending denial of this application here. As I just mentioned here, the comprehensive plan requires it to be single-family residential. It allows for commercial if you're near two major roads. This one is not. If you're expanding existing commercial, you can also do that. This one's not doing that as well. There is no other like zone property in the area. Everything here is pretty much RC2, so it doesn't conform to the existing area there. Everything around here, like I showed you before, is low-density homes. There's no commercial around here. The buildings that were instructed were done without proper permitting. They came forward as being a residential use, and it wasn't disclosed as being these are actually for commercial use for a batting facility, for a training facility. The setbacks, therefore, are not commercial buffers. There's no setback requirements for the buildings. There's no buffer there. There's no parking requirements. There was no site plan done for commercial use. And this could also be considered spot zoning. Just to kind of walk you through, this was a property in 2009. And you can see it's just the one house there, small garage. Then they added came in for a building permit for a garage just for storage building. They added that. They also added they closed off the area between the house, existing house, and the garage. They added some more storage buildings here as well. Added the baseball field, added the pitching area. And then recently they came back in here and they actually covered that area there for the batting cage. This picture here shows different numbers. As you can see, number 1, that was the first permit that came through. That was to enclose the area between the house and the garage, and then also add a small building, 50 by 60, I believe it was. Number 2 was a second request that came in, and they added the next storage area. 3 was it came in as a carport. That's the actual where they had the pitching area there. Those labeled as number 4 were not permitted at all. There was no building permit, no zoning compliance. So those things came in without any kind of permits. Looking at the area here, it's pretty well developed, very intense. If this did become a BD1 zone property, they'd be requiring a series of variances to be able to mitigate their issues to the neighbors next to them. Also in your packet, you have a series of pictures. This is showing the site coming from 274. In the bottom corner is what they called a carport, which is actually a batting facility, pitching facility. This is on the south side of the property, and you can see where's the road coming off 274 and how close those buildings are to the property line. Could not meet the commercial setback of 30 feet for residential property. That's on the south side. And then the bottom picture there is the other side of the property, also next to homes. So like I mentioned, we're recommending denial. Doesn't meet the comprehensive plan, doesn't meet the character of the area, and we think it should be denied. Any questions from Planning Commission?
Assuming council adopts the rezone, recode, would this work for the new recreation district?
It would be park and recreation, but I really don't believe this is more of a commercial one.
This
The
is more-
TR is for county parks, local parks. This is more of a commercial recreation, so therefore it wouldn't work. It would still be in recode, it's still BD1 or the new
Okay.
NC.
Right, okay. Any further questions?
I guess they did 4 different sets of buildings. Nobody ever went out and followed up on this? I mean, because like after, the second building, after, number 2 was built, I mean, that's a substantial area on the lot that's being developed. I would think that would raise some kind of flag.
You would have hoped that would have raised a flag, it did not. It was the inspector looks at it, they see they have a building permit, it's been approved by staff, they look at the building, and that's what they approve. They don't approve the use, they don't look at the, is it what's going on here kind of thing. I will say we've gotten much better at that, and we do that now.
So just for example, like the carport, I mean, that looks like it's built right on the property line.
It is, and on the application, I went back and looked at the permit itself, and they were showing setbacks. They were calling I think they were calling Haynesville Highway was the frontage, and they drew on there, like it meets the setbacks. That's how the applicant drew the buildings on there, put a setback line on there. We looked at that and said it meets the setbacks.
Okay,
It's
and
not
then
really
when it was
correct.
being built, nobody ever questioned it and then
Well, I
said,
think the pad was put in there first, like years ago, and then they came back in for a building permit. And I will say that each time we've had a building permit, it's because they were having to get a code enforcement, they were building without a permit. So things were begun, things were started, and then they kind of came in afterwards and got a building permit for these buildings as well.
Is the applicant here?
I don't know. Sheldon? Yeah, he is.
Okay, if you could state your name and address for the record, please?
Yes, ma'am. My name is Sheldon Brown. I live at 2702 Windswept Cove. And so in 2009, I was still playing, right? And I bought that property to keep my RV, my boats, all my equipment, okay? When I would come home, we had a recreational team in Clover, South Carolina. Well, the kids had nowhere to play, no venues to go practice at, right? So I put a basketball goal in that first, I think she had, I can't remember the number, in that first building. So I would back my equipment out and we would practice in that first building. Obviously the kids got older. And then I went back and I put that building up to store more equipment.
Can we put back up the slide with the numbers on it so we don't have to do that building, this building? Thank you.
There you go.
Okay, thank you.
So 1 was the very first one, and 4 went with 1. Right, 1 was the very first one. That had I don't have a fancy slide, but you can see that 1 had a lift in it. That's my RV and boats, and I used to back that stuff out with a basketball, and we used to practice. My kids were 8 years old. That's how 1 developed. And then when they got a little older, we outgrew that building because it was small. So I built another building, 2, so we could get a bigger basketball court and bat cages for the kids to be able to go and play in. And then now the one problem with the complaint is, and this is between us, is a neighbor that never got along with me from day one. That's the complaint. But as far as me trying to create a commercial business, is not what I was doing.
So is this a commercial business?
I don't think it's a commercial business simply because the money that goes for the players. So I started with 1 team, right? And the money that they gave me was to play in tournaments, okay? To go play in the baseball tournaments. I don't collect no money from the baseball team. We started winning, people started needing a place to go and place to practice. So it's grown through the years. It's grown, and now it comes where people are in and out. I've never seen someone from the county there because I'm always gone. They're coming in. It's like they just come and go.
Thank you. Are there any further questions for the applicant? Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Thank you.
Do we have a motion? I'll make a motion to deny based on county recommendation and that pretty much everything except for the first building is non-compliant. And it's pretty intensive for residential, so I will make a motion to deny.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion?
Just one thing, and I guess this is for staff in terms of questioning. What happens now to the kids who are practicing there? I assume some parents have probably paid, and that doesn't impact my decision. I'm just wondering what happens to all of this now?
Sure, this will go, of course, to council, and they'll have their recommendation, their denial or approval for that. If they do deny it as well, then they'll have to go somewhere else and find a new location for the facility. And it's a commercial business, they have to find somewhere else appropriately zoned and build it there.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? All right. All in favor? Opposed? All right. Item 4, 21-23.
Yeah.
All right, this is case 2123. Applicant is Lee Whitley. The property address 6166 Charlotte Highway in Clover, tax map 48400000024. So the request is to rezone approximately 1 acre from RC1 to BD3. This property, it's co-owned with a much larger property that's also zoned, well, already zoned BD3, and the intent would be to rezone the smaller parcel, recombine it into a larger parcel for future commercial development. And we don't have a site plan or anything because there is none being presented right now. A buyer would have to present that. So here's the vicinity map. You see that the 5 Points intersection is within a quarter mile of the property. Aerial imagery, there used to be a house on this property. It's been torn down since, so this is a vacant property, and the larger property is also vacant. So there's a lot of property here for future development. Nothing really here to speak of. So the zoning, you see BD3 is pretty prevalent at this intersection. The RC1 is prevalent beyond the intersection, and this property kind of notches into the BD3 zone property. So with that, if it were to be rezoned, it would have a nice straight edge of BD3, and then the RC1 would be buffered once the commercial development came in. Future land use plan, this is at the edge of the neighborhood center. If combined with the larger parcel, it would be more in sync with the comprehensive plan because it's much more into the center. So we designate the property as neighborhood residential with the neighborhood center over top. So neighborhood residential provides for mix of housing, 2 to 5 dwellings per acre. Neighborhood serving commercial is appropriate at an intersection or adjacent to existing commercial. And the neighborhood center, that would be more for a small commercial area with neighborhood serving uses with the service area up to 3 miles. So we recommend approval of the requests. The area is generally compatible with the comprehensive, or the request is generally supportive of the comprehensive plan. The area is near the 5 Points intersection. It's, within the neighborhood center. It's, commercial all around it. So adding this into a larger commercial property makes sense. So our condition of approval is the property shall be recombined into parcel number, and that's the larger parcel, the parent parcel that's co-owned, prior to the site plan approval for development. This is a condition that we've already run by the property owner. The property owner is agreeable to it. He intends to sell these properties together as one for commercial development. So this is consistent with the BD3 in the surrounding area, and like I said before, if it were to go up against RC1, there would be a buffer. So, any questions?
If there are no questions, do you have a question?
I do,
Oh,
just
sorry,
for
go
my
ahead.
own knowledge, why did you request that they roll it into the parent property? Like,
Well, the thought is, if they're combined into one parcel, we're gonna have a larger development, and instead of having, kind of piecemeal development, we would rather have it all done together, instead of having like a small driveway to some side development, have a larger comprehensive project.
okay, just again, for my own knowledge, thank you.
Yep.
Any further questions of staff?
I was gonna say, as a follow-up to that, that just basically takes it back to what's on page 47 in the packet, which is the original plat for that land.
Yeah, it puts it back into its original parcel. It was cut out years ago for a house to be developed on that property, and it's since
Gotcha.
been torn down.
Okay, no further questions. Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve, subject to staff recommendation.
I'm sorry, you seconded? You seconded, okay, thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor? All right. Next item is the zoning code, subdivision code.
So this is Recode. Just to remind you where we left off at our workshop last month, and the item was deferred to the next meeting for Planning Commission. You provided at that meeting, a variety of different questions you had of the consultant, and they answered those questions, the issues you had, and it was attached to the memo, to the package tonight. This evening, we would hope to, as I've mentioned before, get a recommendation of approval from Planning Commission this evening. And then if you have issues you would like to be considered, is to bring those up in the form of a motion to be discussed and voted individually. If you have questions of us, Jonathan and I are both here. We can answer whatever we can. But it's pretty much in your hands now to be able to take this thing forward.
I do have some very specific questions, particularly in section 155. So I'm not sure in what route we're going. And let me first preface my comments by saying that I have the old one. I don't have the new. Some of the numbers are different, but I think we probably can figure out where we are, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm one of the ones, I'll admit, that forgot to leave my book outside of my door. So so how do you want to handle it, Diana? How do we handle it?
I was going to ask the attorneys if we wanted to get a motion before we had discussion, or if we can have discussion first to be able to discuss the items.
We can have a motion. I think the items, if they're concerned, since it was deferred and it's still pending, I think those questions can be asked and answered, and then they will be able to formulate an appropriate motion after those questions are answered.
Thank you.
Right.
Can I ask a clarifying question? So is the motion to ask for an additional change, like per motion? Or is it?
So I think just to make things easier to be able to track as you make changes is to be able to, like I said, hopefully get a general motion for approval. And then if you want to do a friendly amendment, to be able to say, can we discuss this? Put that for a motion, have the board discuss it, and then vote on that. And then if it carries by the board, it then gets to recommendation to include that to council. We don't make the changes here. We will make recommendations to make these changes. But it's probably the easiest way to be able to make sure we're tracking everything that you're saying.
Okay.
But we would then approve something before we wanted the
Yeah.
changes? I guess I'm confused on that part.
If I might offer some clarity. So you can feel free to ask us at this point in time any questions that you might have. Once you're satisfied with the level of answers that you're getting, or you feel like you've exhausted all questions you might have, at that point in time, it might be appropriate to put forward a motion, hopefully to recommend approval. And that would be your single central motion. And then thereafter, if each of the individual planning commissioners has something that they would like to recommend be altered in these drafts, that you make that as a separate motion to amend the main motion. You can vote on it individually, and they can either succeed or fail one by one as you go through. So that gives you utmost clarity on what you're voting for at each individual vote. And for the record, we also have clarity on what might be changing in terms of recommendations to council.
Thank you.
So are there any questions of staff?
Yes, I'd like to direct specifically to 155.152. And I think that is the same number as it is in the new one. The zoning administrator may determine that an unlisted use is allowed as permitted, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I note in the footnotes of the current zoning, it says that anything not specifically approved is you can't use, or something, anything not specifically listed is approved. But it seems like here that that we're changing that and giving the zoning administrator the authority to do this, or to permit conditional use or special exceptions or those things. Am I reading that correctly?
Yes, so this is a common practice throughout the nation. We are one of the few jurisdictions that does not have this provision. So currently the way that the zoning code is structured, or the one provision that states this, is that if a use is not listed specifically, so if you don't say food trucks are permitted, so if you don't mention food trucks at all, therefore they're not permitted. So that obviously causes problems whenever you have new or creative uses. Things change over time, definitions change over time. So that's created some problems where the county doesn't allow fairly common uses that are allowed throughout the country, food trucks being an example. So this is a interpretive authority that the zoning administrator would have to say, well, you know, this use that's come in, we don't have a specific definition for it. It's fairly unique. How might it best be permitted, whether that's by right, saying it's most similar to this type of use. So if it's some type of unique retail, it's most similar to this other type of retail in terms of intensity and hours of operation, things like that, so that you can allow it through that interpretation of what it is most similar to in the existing zoning code. And all of those definitions per this new provision would be categorized, and then annually would have some follow-on text amendments to make sure that we're adding all of those interpretations to the code. So it's not we're not relying on archaic memos over time, so it gets adopted every year.
And certainly I understand why you would want to do it for ease. Mm-hmm. But if we go back to the statute creates a way that there's supposed to be a legislative process for this. Now, and I'm thinking, obviously, I'm sitting here as a commissioner, not as an attorney, but I'm thinking about it as an attorney. And does this not create problems, though, for your attorney if you're trying to enforce something that's, let's say, that's not an approved way? Does it not create I'm thinking as a lawyer, if I see this language here, then quite frankly, I could defend anyone who does anything in the county if no one has to go, or if there's some authority not to go through the legislative process. I mean, am I misunderstanding that, one of the attorneys?
No, our view is that does hinder our ability to prosecute in the magistrate court. The permitted uses and prohibited uses language that exists now is a very, very favorable tool that we use in the prosecution of charges that are brought against persons that are making uses contrary to what the zoning code calls for. This matter was debated at the council workshop in great detail. Our recommendation is that you restore the current language in the code and delete this provision in its entirety because it creates somewhat unfettered discretion in a unilateral person, which is better left to a legislative process with council and the planning commission.
So what is council's position on it? Is that something?
They debated it quite thoroughly, and they'll take it up most likely when they hear it.
So the new, I also didn't leave mine outside my door, so I
Okay,
don't have the
all
new
right.
one. So the new one, has that language reverted back, or is this
No.
language still in it?
The current book says that the zoning administrator has that
The authority.
responsibility.
Okay,
Now, obviously, I'm not privy and I didn't attend any council meetings, so I don't know what the discussion was at council, but I'm reading this, and I've not seen any minutes or, spoken to. But as I read this as an attorney, I would love to have a provision like this if I'm representing someone on the other side against the county. And so
The current language in the code says unless the contrary is clear from the context of the list or other regulations of this chapter, use is not specifically listed or prohibited. And that's the code section we use in the prosecution of our cases to lock in the violator who's using his property unlawfully, because it's the prong that we attached in the court proceedings that show that the unlisted use is not prohibited, and it aids in the trial of those cases.
so you would like to see
The existing
the
language.
existing stay?
Yes, ma'am.
So remove this and go back to the
because the
existing?
existing language more mirrors the statute, as opposed to.
Okay. Are there further questions of staff?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
I
And I
have
have a few
two
more
questions,
too,
actually.
but go ahead
Excellent.
with yours.
I have a couple too, so
Yeah,
y'all.
all right, go ahead with yours.
One is, we talked about extensions and the fact that in the past, we've had problems with extensions to the extent that the state code says that if something's, somebody's out here 5 years from the time they submitted a plan and things have changed, we should be able to deny another extension if things have changed. And in the past, we've been told that, no, we cannot do that. And I don't agree with that at all. I think we ought to be able to deny another extension if things have changed substantially that have a negative impact on the community if that development proceeds. That's my first question, and I'm not sure where we ended up with that last time, but I would definitely like to see that changed.
Can I piggyback on that and speak and say that I think that in that situation, particularly if the TIA changes, and I think that in particularly the more populated areas of the county, they should be done more frequently than, every 5 years? That if that changes, that should automatically trigger something different in the extension process.
Well, not just traffic, but schools. I mean,
Yeah.
we're starting to build, at times, recommend approval of developments down the road where the schools are now overloaded.
Yeah, I have another comment on that.
And
one,
then
but
we
I'll-
have situations with water where the same thing occurs, where we got a development that was approved 5 years ago. Meantime, today, we can't get water to the neighborhoods. Why do we have to give an extension to this development for 10 more years? So I think under any of those in any circumstances, if we see something, if the planning commission sees something negative as a result of another extension, we should be able to deny it.
Well, and that was one of my questions in the workshop, because the state code says that you may extend, the time for a vested site-specific development plan to a total of 5 years upon a determination there's just cause for the extension and that the public interest is not adversely affected. But we can never use that
Right.
here, even if we can show very clearly how the public interest is negatively affected. Is that language being put into our county?
So the
Ordinance.
county's vested rights section is in Chapter 153, which is not being amended with the Recode project. Not to say that it couldn't be at some future point in time. However, it has more recently been revised to align with the state statute. And I know the exact provision in the state statute that you're referring to, and in a couple of sentences prior to that one, it says the Planning Commission shall approve. So it has some conflicting terms in it, and when you've got two conflicting terms, usually in legal parlance, the more conservative one prevails. We're happy to entertain that discussion some more with the county attorneys at some point in the future, but Chapter 153 is not up for revision with this Recode project.
Okay.
You had some further questions?
I do. There was a term in here, and I was just pulling it up, I think in the 155.712. The word ambiguity is used, and I'm just trying to get a definition of what do you mean by the ambiguity. Again, I'm reading this, probably through a different lens, but I'm just creating this. How does that create problems? And then I got one more. I'm gonna direct your attention down to one more section.
I'm not sure I'm on the same section as you. So you said 155, 172?
Yeah, 712.
712.
712.
Section
Sorry if I
E,
didn't say it.
Page 56.
Thank you for helping me out, who has the new.
Oh, so you're referring to the section on zoning code interpretations?
Correct.
So that line ambiguity is referring to, so if there is a development approval that's, say, 10 years old, and there is some particular term that is subject to interpretation or the meaning is not clear, that gives the applicant the ability to ask the zoning administrator, it is unclear to my client or us, the prior applicants or the new property owners, what this provision means. Can you please give us your staff official determination of what this wording is or whatever the restriction or implementation might be of that language?
And again, I would probably recommend defining ambiguity a little more, because certainly I would just recommend defining that a little more closely. But I'm more concerned about 612, where it talks about, at least in the old one, it talks about the hardships and the variances. Isn't that the reason why there's a variance process? And and let me just tell you where I'm going. And I don't know how much we can discuss what we talked about in executive session, so I won't go in great details, but I publicly said that it seems like there's a continued grab to do away with the legislative process or do away with bringing things before the board. And obviously, I totally disagree. And now that we have both of the attorneys here, I'll say on the record, I totally disagree with the county's interpretation of what the statute says, that we cannot deny something. That's not what the statute says to me, and certainly I don't see in the case law that says that. Nevertheless, so when I'm reading this language, I'm reading as that many things cannot have to, at least the way that it's presented here, can avoid the process of having to come before the zoning commission and or council, can be made at the zoning administrator or the staff level. And, I've just pointed out 3 examples there, and certainly the third one there being about hardships, now not having to go through the variance process.
Yes, so these administrative adjustments, it's a new process, and it's really meant to be a reduction in workload and time spent both on the staff side, the board side, and the applicant side for very minor changes in the limited number of things that could be modified by an administrative adjustment. So The approval criteria states that the extent of an administrative adjustment cannot exceed 10%. So if you have a 10-foot setback requirement and you accidentally place your shed 1 foot into the setback that is 10 feet, it seems to be an unreasonable amount of time invested for all parties involved to vary 1 foot. So anything beyond that certainly would go to the zoning board per the usual course of business.
Last point I'll make, and I think I've made it clear here to the board and to you all, my thoughts about this generally. But what that does is it creates situations. I hear what you're saying, and I know that you and your staff and everyone else will have great intentions. But what it does is it creates a process where if I'm in favor of something and I'm staff and I want to provide preferential treatment, I can do that. But if I'm prejudiced towards this project, and even though I have the same authority to approve it, I'm going to send them through the legislative process. When you create rules like this, you create discrimination on projects. And so as someone who's looking at it the way I'm looking at it, then there's just no way I can support that. And I would hope the other board members will see it. I get it. I wish all of us didn't have to go through the legislative process and we could streamline some of these things. But when we create processes that, if staff likes this particular thing, then we're not going to send them through. But if we don't like it, we're going to send them through the variance process. And I just think that creates problems instead of making everybody come through the process.
Yeah, and that's why the consultants have added in the required findings, so it can't be an arbitrary decision. The zoning administrator has to find the required findings in order to grant that.
But we also got another term, and again, I don't want you to think I'm being confrontational, but you and I both know that we also, just like we don't have a definition of the word ambiguity, we don't have a definition of arbitrary. What is arbitrary? And what may be arbitrary to you or perceived as arbitrary by staff, I may see as different. I may see that differently. So if your attorneys are okay with it, and
The discretionary authority that's granted in here certainly requires some assessment and evaluation going forward by council in this body, but I agree when you create rules that may or may not be followed from a unilateral application of an individual, it is potential for being problematic, and certainly appreciate you bringing it to our attention and your concern with it. It's something we need to look at, and council should look at a little bit more closely.
Wasn't there an issue with this exact thing several years ago on a PD plan where there were several administrative adjustments that were done?
If you can give a little bit more specifics
Crystal
on
Lakes.
Yeah.
Somebody lost their job over it?
Yeah, there were some changes. So yes, it can rise to the level of being an issue for the county.
So this has been, I'm sorry, so this has been an issue that has been raised in the
Several
county.
years ago, on Hands Mill Highway, there's a neighborhood, Crystal Lakes, that was done as a PD plan. And I want to say about 2008 or so, several administrative adjustments were made that were done by staff and approved and not gone through a rehearing of the plan was done. And I think it was by the 5th or 6th adjustment, it had substantially changed what was originally approved. And so there was some fallout from it at staff level.
I just think that just from a legal perspective, there's a reason why a legislator has created the statute. There's a reason why our county has ordinances, and there's a reason why these boards exist and all these things, and it's to keep the playing field level and above board and equal and equitable for everybody. And when we start getting into decisions where individuals can make decisions on projects, under the cover of darkness or in their office or on the telephone, it creates problems for everybody. And I personally cannot support that. And we're hearing from their attorneys saying that creates problems for them.
Oh, I understand. I agree with you.
Any further questions, discussion?
I do have a couple of questions. Granted, I was not here in October, and I'm sorry for that. I did leave some notes, but I don't know that everything translated or was transmitted. I'm particularly concerned, and I think you alluded to this, a couple of months ago, we had something that came before us that essentially, you know, it was a townhome development, and the school district flat out said they couldn't support it. And I would love to see something along the lines of, in the same way that water and sewer has to, what's the word?
Willingness and capability.
Willingness and capability, thank you. I would like for new developments within the county to receive something like that from the school districts. I think that because we are the county and there are still, you know, the cities within the county that are often vying for those resources at the same time, and we don't necessarily always know all of the developments that are happening simultaneously. It's short-sighted, I think, on our part to say, oh, well, there's 100 more spots, so obviously they can accommodate. I don't think that that's the case. So I think it's imperative that if we want to retain home values for future or for current residents and for, you know, incoming folks, that we don't tax one of our most saleable points, which is around here is our school districts. So I feel like this is kind of an important part. I don't exactly know where that falls, so I can't speak to a number, but to me that would be kind of, you know, an essential part.
So that would fall in the preliminary plat section.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah,
But I mean,
I don't think there's a specific number for it, but that would be under the
addition, because
an addition to
yeah,
the-
it's not something that's there
To the
currently.
preliminary plat approval process.
Legally, is that something you can include in the preliminary plat process?
We'd have to evaluate what restrictions, but if it's a recommendation of this body, we'll certainly look at it and report back to council and this body.
Thank you.
We talked about last month, I believe, preliminary plats being approved by the staff, and I'm not sure that's a good idea personally.
Yeah, I know that's written in here. I also had some questions about that and some concerns, just because I don't feel like, I mean, I realize that we've sort of been told that we have to approve when they hit all of the thresholds, and that's frustration in
Can we
itself.
deal with that now while we have their attorneys in here? Because that's not the way I read the statute. And so since you've said that, obviously that's a belief that you have.
Well, that's what I've been told.
We've been
while
told
we've
for years.
been here, so I don't, you know.
But even beyond
because
that,
that is how it reads. It says this has been met.
No, it doesn't read that way.
Well,
I
when
read
they
the
give us
statute.
That's what
when
they
give
give
us the
us.
thing that, you know, when they give us the preliminary plat, when you say, you know, this, and this.
That was based on a state statute, and I've gone and I've read the state statute and debated this ad nauseum, and that's not what the state statute says. But, I mean, maybe now is not the time to discuss that, but I
But even-
disagree with that.
I agree with you completely on that, and I know Larry does. We've argued it for, 6 years?
Well, maybe now is the time to discuss
But
it.
even beyond that, if you look at the Concord Road preliminary plat that came before us, staff has said they recommended approval, they would have approved that, just as it was. But having gone through this process with all of the community septics, I think this was before you were on.
Certainly before I came.
It's all waterfront, and they had multiple community septic systems. So you have a lot more issues with potential breakage. So we were concerned with the community septic. We stated they could not run their community septic under public roadways, and they could not encroach on public roadways as a way to kind of try and contain that. And that wouldn't have happened had it not come before us. And then Maraway, we got in trouble, we had to go to arbitration, but going to arbitration, we ended up with a better project. Fewer lots, 50% more buffer between development and the creek, putting in a roundabout where there was a choke point in the neighborhood and getting acreage donated to the county. Again, that wouldn't have happened had it not come before us. I know it was stressful for staff. It was stressful for those of us who had to go to arbitration. It was a very long day. But again, those things wouldn't have happened. We wouldn't have gotten those added benefits had it not come before us. So I think keeping that with Planning Commission has merit. And then now that we have an attorney who has read through the state statute and understands it a little better than I did, that could be very helpful on items like that.
Can I bring up a couple of other questions and then maybe we can go back to?
And sorry to interrupt you.
No, no.
That was very rude of me, and I
It was not-
apologize for
No,
that.
I like that we can play off each other. I just want to make sure that I do have some other kind of bigger questions. Again, I'm not sure where they fall. So one is in terms of construction bonds. It's my understanding that construction bonds are only tied to roadways in terms of county sign-off on things. And to me, that's short-sighted. There are certainly other things that can and do go wrong within neighborhoods. And I feel like before the final plat is signed off on, outside of just roadways, there should be some recourse if a developer does not uphold their end of the bargain. Is there a way to address that?
I think the way it's written, there's two parts to your answer. The first part is there's a section in here that talks about warranties and bonds for roads and those kinds of issues. Those are items that, you know, are like the water and sewers is handed over to the county. In the case of the roads are proposed to be dedicated into the county system. I think what you're looking under also would be section F in the sub, which talks about property owner associations and the requirements that would be proposed for that. And this is all new.
Right. And I was happy to see some of this in here, because I know that there are lots of people that end up with having issues when new developments are turned over. So I think, for example, in that section F or 154.154, number 7 and 8 specifically, maybe some more direct, a couple of additional words being, the developer, an initial operations and maintenance budget. We're saying that the developer needs to put that in, correct?
Do you have the new binder or the old?
I'm currently looking at the old. I also have a copy of the new.
So are you in part 3?
I am in the first section F on page 7.
Well, what I'm looking for is we're in subchapter F. I think we're all on that same page there. There's part 1, 2, and 3.
Just read off.
I am in 3.
Okay. And then are you looking at the required covenants, conditions, and restrictions?
I'm looking specifically at number 7 and 8. And where it says the initial operations and maintenance budget pre-funded through the first fiscal year of its existence. And I'm just clarifying that that and number 8 are both by the developer of the project? Or are we talking about the homeowners association?
And this whole section deals with the POAs. So this is stating that if you are going to form a POA, this is the list of required covenants, conditions, and restrictions that you have to have. You can certainly have more, but you need to have at a minimum these listed here.
So I'm just looking, so in terms of these things that are now being mandated that they be funded, which I don't disagree with if you have an HOA.
And I just want to clarify, these are being carried forward. So it's currently in the existing code, chapter 154. It's under homeowners association, but obviously you can have more than just homes, be in sort of these ownership groups. So the text has been modified, but all the provisions should be the same.
Okay, so can you just clarify for me, though, is the intent that the developer is the one that funds those things?
We don't mandate who funds what when it comes to creation of a POA.
Because essentially those are in place before there are
Yeah,
residents.
in practice, they're probably going to be started with the first year's worth of funding by the developer, because you're not going to have other members on the outset, at least when you're developing a residential community.
Right.
But you certainly might have commercial partners that are involved as well.
So I'm wondering if there should be some delineation or some specific wording as to how that becomes funded initially. Or do you not think that that's necessary?
If you have some suggestion about how that might be accomplished, because I think the intent of this section is to ensure that the POAs are covering certain basic requirements, so that they're initially going to be funded, that they have a method for membership, and that they're going to maintain all things that are under their responsibility. But it doesn't get into the specifics of how they would like to parse out their funding or who provides what. It's just covering the very basics, so someone doesn't come in with a substandard set of covenants and thinks that that's going to function in practice.
Well, I guess that's my biggest concern is, if you come in and you have a developer who doesn't initially fund it, and you have a neighborhood that possibly doesn't, come to completion for some reason. I'm thinking down the line when the market is not as it is now, you could easily be left with a substandard neighborhood, no matter what the intention was, if it's not, the developer's responsibility initially.
Yeah, and I understand that. I think I understand the point that you're trying to make, and I think that might go beyond the scope of what zoning can control. Because I think the intent of zoning is to make sure that you have a property owners association that is A, established, and B, has the rules set up to make sure that all of the responsibilities of the POA are addressed, to make sure that open space is maintained and that your stormwater infrastructure is maintained, and there's a set of rules that guide the POA. But in terms of making sure that going forward beyond that first year, that there is sufficient funding to cover all those responsibilities, that's really going to be a private relationship between the developer or group of owners that are starting the POA and all of the subsequent property owners.
But isn't that essentially what's here? What it's saying is that needs to be set up? Or am I misinterpreting?
I don't think homeowners buy a house to, one of the things that they ask is, well, is my HOA set up with enough funding for it to cover all somebody else has to look out for them. And I don't think it's...
That might, and you're happy to explore this further, but I think we're getting into staff then analyzing how much, as essentially a third party, how much it might cost to maintain all of the proposed infrastructure, which might be beyond our scope to review, and then recommend what they should have in reserve to create a POA, and then any assessments and going into the future that might be very difficult for staff to administrate.
Well, true. I don't necessarily disagree. I guess I was a little surprised when I was reading this, more in depthly and saw that there were percentages suggested and things, but then it wasn't stipulated who provided those percentages. So I guess that was really my question. But we can move on from there. But back to the construction bonds, I do think, again, that there are parts of construction that aren't just tied to the roads. And it was interesting to me that there aren't any bonds in York County. At least that's what I thought I learned recently. Unlike other areas of the country, that during construction, you know, they can be held if something's not completed properly or within, you know, the scope of what's expected from the county.
Are there particular infrastructure components that you're concerned about that you would seek to be bonded?
Well, the stormwater drainage, that type of thing. It's my understanding it's tied completely to the streets. Am I misunderstanding that, or do I have bad information?
There's a neighborhood in Lake Wiley that's going through that right now, that their HOA is stuck with over $100,000 that they're looking to have to pay for retention ponds that were not put in properly. So now they're looking at the residents to pay that.
Mm-hmm. And I don't, unfortunately, I don't think they're the only neighborhood that
Right.
could be in
I'm
that,
sure they're not.
in that particular, you know, bind. So I'm just wondering, you know, is that something?
Yeah, and the way that the bonds are currently structured today and carried forward in Recode 154 is that the county accepts bonds for things that are in its right of way. So things that the county is going to have to maintain going forward. And I want to clarify that these are not bonds to actually put in the infrastructure. It's to address any deficiencies that might arise after the infrastructure is placed in and before they hand it over to the county for maintenance in perpetuity. So that's why you've got essentially the roads that cover the pavement, and there is a new bond in there for sidewalks. So that was added. So that's new. But essentially, all the bonds today are addressed in the public right-of-way for the county.
Just because I don't know, as a part of those roads, like when you've got curb and gutter, which includes the wastewater drainage, does that also become the county's responsibility?
It does, yes.
Okay. Because I think that does speak to that larger problem.
Right.
Where as you continue to have developers build, there is concern that they'll do okay on the roads, may not do so okay on wastewater management. And why that couldn't be bonded in, because that's a true property impact, especially around the lake. We know why there. But then elsewhere in the county, as development continues, you're covering up more land, less permeable surface for the water and so properly managing water is going to be an issue.
I agree.
So are you saying you'd like to recommend council look at construction bond, adding a construction bond for wastewater management?
Truthfully, I think on anything that the county has to sign off on. Because from what I've told, they come in and look at it one time when they sign off on it. Mm-hmm. But if the neighborhood isn't done for another 3, 4, 5 years, you know, if it's signed off, I don't exactly know, the timeline, but I know that things can go awry in that short amount of time. So yes, I think there needs to be more accountability in case there's a problem. So
Okay.
yes, that.
Okay, well, I'm trying to take notes on what all you're saying so that if we recommend approval and then ask them to look, we know exactly what we're asking for. So on that, I have construction bond for wastewater.
I think you mean stormwater, not
Stormwater,
wastewater.
Yeah, not
you're
wa-
right.
not wastewater.
Clarification there. There you
That
go.
was my
Thank you.
bad.
Sorry, not
Stormwater.
sewers.
Stormwater.
Yeah, for stormwater, and potentially other issues.
Yeah,
How
but
do-
I do think stormwater in itself, in addition to the roads, is probably the most impactful that I can think of?
Probably the most expensive. I believe the neighborhoods bill was, I want to say it was 154,000 is what they're looking at.
Yeah. Yes, I think
And that's only one that I know of. I'm
Right.
sure there's others. All right. Anything further?
Okay, I am still concerned about townhomes, permitted use in the new RMX 20 district. And there were 4 options there. So I don't understand, are we supposed to pick an option?
And make a recommendation?
And make a recommendation? I mean, I have a recommendation, which would be option 3, and that is allow townhomes subject to conditions that do not apply to townhomes in other districts.
So have special conditions
Well, see,
specifically
there's
for.
a special exception use is number 4. I'm sorry, I want number 2, to prohibit. Okay. I do have a sinus infection, and it is affecting my eyes and my brain, so, number 2, prohibit townhomes, which is consistent with the current standards in RD1. So,
Does anybody else have a
thought on that?
thought on that one, or is that something you would consider putting in the recommendation to council, that it's prohibited in the new RMX 20, which is consistent with the current zoning?
I would support that.
Okay,
I have no objection.
okay. I thought you had another?
I do.
Okay.
Okay, and then on the question concerning the height measurement from finished grade, that this may increase the height of townhomes if the developer uses fill to build up the site. So the response to me is not satisfactory. I don't see where the question that was brought up was answered at all. So what I would like to see is possibly a special exception added to this, where if the townhome development is backing up to a residential community, that be looked at as far as a flow on how much a builder can go in and build up his development, and if it's totally inconsistent with the adjacent properties around it, what can we do to correct this? Because it's an injustice to a residential community that is established, and then you've got townhomes going in and arbitrarily just adding 10 feet of mounds in people's backyard.
Beyond townhomes, I would think any development, I mean, you wouldn't want single-family built up a height behind an established either. So I don't think that's necessarily just townhomes. I would say for any development,
Right.
that they should only be able to raise it a certain amount before building without
I
possibly.
mean, there's no, that I read here, there's no consistent measurements or recommendation for how to blend those properties together. There's no blending that I can see.
And so if I could add, the consultants did give us some additional research over email discussing the site alteration and fill question. So they scoured the state for similar or anything approaching that type of restriction. And they really couldn't find any specific examples, but they found 2 jurisdictions that limit fill in general terms, So if that's something the Planning Commission wants to consider, they provided two examples here. The first being from the town of Mount Pleasant, and their section states, unless necessary to meet drainage or other applicable requirements of this code, lots shall not be filled in order to artificially increase building height. And then the more thorough example came from the city of Greenville, which it says, site alteration, infrastructure shall be designed to minimize the alteration of site topography. Infrastructure shall accommodate natural grades to the maximum feasible extent, minimize the removal of existing ground cover and subsoil, and minimize the importation of fill material.
I like the option 2.
Option 2.
Because that Greenville is compatible with our terrain.
Exactly.
Mount Pleasant's a different thing.
yeah,
That's
it's
you've got marshy areas
low
and
country.
low country, but I think
Yeah.
the minimal, modification of the natural topography is something to investigate.
Anything further?
I'd like to add to the use table, I guess it was about 3 months ago, we had a rezoning request for a business that wanted to have liquor sales. The way I read through it now, I think it could really pop up just about anywhere. So I'd like to have, like ABC stores specifically listed as a use in the table and limited to GC and maybe a special exception in neighborhood commercial.
Is the one that we approved a couple months ago, would that fall into?
I
Can't remember exactly what it was,
It was rezoned to BD3 because it was a gas station,
right?
Yeah.
and they had a liquor store as well.
So are you saying specifically liquor stores or
Yeah.
any place that would sell liquor, like a bar or something like that?
Liquor stores.
Liquor stores, okay.
Bars and nightclubs is listed as a
Separate?
use. Yeah, it's
Okay.
already listed here
Perfect.
as a use.
Okay.
And so I'm not talking about grocery stores that, have beer and wine.
But specifically a liquor store?
Yeah.
Two more small things. Section 155.04. Again, I'm not exactly sure how to tell you where to look these up. It's talking about parking, particularly special districts. And it's talking about a parking demand study. I would also suggest no less than 2 spots per unit. I think a lot of places sometimes get into trouble when there's not enough parking. Not necessarily that I've seen here, but in other towns and cities. And so trying to push people to, carpool and take public transportation, they make less parking spaces around larger buildings or larger developments. And
So are you talking residential or commercial?
no, this is, are we on? No, I'm talking residential.
Residential? No fewer than 2 per unit?
That would be my hope.
That are off-street.
Yeah, that are off-street, on-street, not counting.
She's saying for any residential, no fewer than 2 parking spaces available off-street, so on the property.
Is that speaking in general, or is that talking about the special districts? You started off talking about special districts, and that's a whole different section for where parking is located. So I want to make sure you're talking about in general.
No, that was my fault, not special districts. I'm speaking specifically to, for example, apartments and/or townhomes or places where there are large.
Right, they don't do the parking demand, I don't believe in in the straight parking section. It's only in special districts allows that. So those are going to be based upon number of bedrooms. So I want to make sure we're talking about the right sections.
Yeah, and to your point, in the table, so in part, subchapter D, Development and Design Standards, Part 5, Parking, and subpart 5.2, Off-Street Parking Ratio, that has the table, and it lists every single use in the use table and how many parking spaces you need to have per type of use.
Wait, tell me
And
where you are
single-family detached dwellings is 2.
Okay, as long as it is, then I wrote my note in the wrong section then, I apologize.
Anything further?
Jamie, it may take time, but would it be of any value just to go through each of the ones that was provided here and just call the number and be sure nobody had any questions? I just want to be sure we don't miss anything. I mean, there's about
I was
12.
hoping everybody read through it before they got
Well,
here.
I did, but
I know. You
there's
did.
been so many questions asked and we've jumped around at things that are in this
Yeah.
section, but also outside the section. I just want to be sure we don't
Okay.
miss anything.
Would anybody like to go through it, or have you all kind of gone through and looked at what your concerns were?
Even if we just go, be sure there's no questions on this page,
Sure.
because we've jumped around so many things.
We have jumped around. All right, so in your packet for tonight's meeting, 155, 153, concern that townhomes are a permitted use. We covered and agreed that we liked option 2, prohibit them. And RMX 20, which is consistent with RD1, which is what it's replacing. 151, 53, concern with long-range use options of defunct golf courses. Does anybody have any questions or concerns on that? The plan is to recode those to the new Parks and Rec District. So I think that pretty much covers the problem that we've had with the one golf course that turned into townhomes. The riparian buffer width, we recommended that they stick with what council had already done. Do we have any questions on what they've recommended?
No.
Okay, 155, 567 does not adequately provide accessible parking for health-related uses.
I was happy with the response.
With their response, okay. 155, 812, height measurements, finished grade. We covered that with the Greenville, yep. See the City of Greenville statute, limit the height of fill. 154.027, they've just removed the block distance in AGC, which was one of our requests.
Yes.
LDC 154.097, conserve that low-impact development incentives may not be sufficient to encourage the use of LID. That's a fairly long one. I won't read the whole thing. Did anybody have any notes on that?
I'm still not thrilled with what the incentives are. I don't think it's enough to incentivize anybody to do it.
I agree, but
I'm just throwing out
Yep.
there. That's all I can say. I can't, just
I don't want to offer a whole lot of incentives, though. 154, 112, concern with the accuracy of aerial photography. They've added that it can't be more than 5 years old, I believe, is 2 years old. No, every 2 years, yep.
Yeah.
So they've covered that. 154, 112, sample survey may not adequately identify trees. 154, 187, were we all in agreement that we would like to see preliminary plat stay with Planning Commission?
correct.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. 154, 188, concern regarding the reliability of the willingness and capabilities from water and sewer service providers. I understand their response, I still don't like it.
And I think Mr. Kendry is going to look into the school issue.
Right, yeah, I was gonna go through the notes that I took too and see if I missed anything.
I think that ties into that.
It does,
Yeah.
it does.
It's just, it's just a shame that we can't
Hold them accountable.
hold some, Because they might have every bit of willingness in the world, but
just don't.
zero ability, and
Yeah.
that's
The capability
That's
part of that
bad
letter
for-
is, yeah,
that's bad for residents of the county.
yeah. 154-190, concern with procedures for renewal of vested rights. We're not covering 153, but I would still like council to take a look at chapter 153.
I agree. I think
Yes.
I would like that specifically at least reviewed by council.
Okay, sorry, I was making a note on that. 154-215, timing of construction and required transportation improvements. Were there any questions or comments on that response?
Don't like that response either. How do
No.
we get that addressed by council?
Yeah. Because we had one tonight that, I mean, it's gonna remain unmitigated.
Yeah, because it's not even it's not even 40% there, if
Yeah.
I remember the numbers correctly.
Yeah,
Or
it's
maybe
not,
it's a little
yeah, it's
bit
not
over.
even 50,
Yeah.
well,
I think
close
they're,
to.
I think with this one, it's like at 50% or just,
No, because if here it says, at the end of that long paragraph, commissioners express interest in changing this policy to require developers to construct the improvements when a proposed development increases the delay by 50% or more. And then the response is basically, no revisions are proposed since this is a policy decision. So it would remain at 80%, the way I'm reading that, unless somebody reads it differently. This is where I look to Montreal as the attorney.
I'll read it differently.
Okay.
So would you like to include in the recommendations to council that they take a look at that section specifically?
Yes.
Yes.
And if I could, I might recommend you have the county attorneys take a look at that suggestion also, because the reason there's a limitation on the maximum amount that you could have a developer contribute or outright build an improvement is the proportionality of their impact. So, you get to perhaps an unreasonable exaction that could put the county in legal hot water for asking for improvements that aren't necessarily tied to the amount of impact that a developer is causing with their project. So just a suggestion.
Yeah, and may we be provided a copy of that memo that they're reading from? I don't think we had it on our packet information. What they're reading from. I didn't believe we had that.
It's in there.
Thank you.
Jamie, can we just mention, I don't know that it needs to be 50%, but something between 50 and 80. I mean, there just needs to be a lower threshold.
a lower threshold than 80%.
Yeah, than the existing.
Okay.
Because that one tonight, it may be years before it's ever mitigated.
Exactly, and so I hate approving that, but again, I feel like I have to because it ticks all the boxes. Right. I know, and
Yeah.
it's already Bailey.
154-219, TA requirement will not adequately address changes that have occurred since original study. Now, this little section here is 154, even though the rest of vested rights is 153, so.
This particular provision is discussing the TIAs and when they can be caused to be updated. So there's a list in there of things that could trigger that, and one of them is background improvements, things like that. So when you get these longer windowed developments that have further build-outs, we had one tonight, it's 2026. Sometimes you might have one that's 2030, so a lot can happen in 10 years. So when the background changes, that's one of the triggers to change a TIA, even if there is a vested rights applied.
Okay. 154-219, any questions on that? Looks like they just removed.
Yeah, they clarified it.
Yep. So, okay.
Thank you for doing that.
Absolutely,
And it yielded some good discussion and additional points.
Absolutely. Any further questions on items not already covered?
Yeah, I would like to see a recommendation added to promote gravel roads in more rural sections of the county to promote, larger lot development.
Allow gravel roads?
Yeah.
Okay. Does anybody else, does everybody agree with that before we include it in a?
And this is rural part of the county promoting gravel road as opposed to paved roads, which would make it less expensive for people in the rural part of the county to build homes and have access to those. Absolutely, I would support that. Thank you.
Okay, so the ones I have right now are 155.152, revert to existing language, which is the first one you brought up. And then number 2, 155.16, no administrative adjustments to make it less arbitrary. Sounds like that was an issue in the past as well. Number 3 would be to add willingness and capability letters from the school district for preliminary plats. Sorry, I didn't have that part on there. Number 4, preliminary plats stay with the Planning Commission. Number 5, 155.153, that's townhomes. We went with option number 2. They would not be allowed in RMX 20 since they're currently not allowed in the other name for that district. Number 6, construction bond for stormwater. Number 7, site alteration, fill, build up, limit height of fill, see the City of Greenville statute. Number 8, use table, add liquor stores, possibly in GC, and a special exception in neighborhood commercial. Number 9, 154.215, TIA, the improvement built at a lower threshold of funds before the 80%. Number 10, allow gravel roads in the rural part of the county. And then 11, have council look at section 153 vested rights, adding, public interest, that whole section about public interest not being adversely impacted, and then also look at it as what triggers we can use at that point. Is that everything? Did I miss anybody's?
I had one final question for staff. Other than roads and stormwater, are there any other infrastructure pieces that the county inherits from a developer that we might need to consider in that bond?
The bond?
I don't know that that specific question was asked.
Well, we do have the sidewalk bond that is covered. You do have water infrastructure, wastewater infrastructure. Anything that's in the right of way, the county would maintain.
So those are already in the construction bond, or?
No, the improvement guarantee fund, as it's currently written and is carried forward, really only, it doesn't cover the installation of these items. It covers, and it doesn't cover all of the items.
Okay, so to add on that, construction bond for stormwater or other items the county may inherit,
Right.
just to see
I'm
if
just
they wanna
thinking
add.
if we're,
Right, if
if
we're
the
gonna do
county's gonna
it,
be on the hook for it, we want the developer to do it
Right.
right and finish it as they originally promised.
So if you were going to phrase that in the terms of a motion, I might suggest something like bonds protecting all items in the county right of way, something like that.
Okay.
okay. Do we have a motion?
You want to discuss that?
Yeah.
No,
Are you going
no,
back to the?
no, I'm not.
You looked very gung-ho for a
I
second.
mean, no. All I was gonna say is, I felt like kind of the nerdy geek reading all this stuff, but I really appreciate serving on the board with people who really take our appointment and responsibilities seriously. So, thank you all for reading all this stuff, as I have and tabbed up and highlighted and coming here prepared to discuss and very fruitful discussion with people who obviously care about this process.
I actually do have one more item.
One more item. Okay.
And I don't know how this could be worded, but something that deals with the repetitive nature of businesses popping up along a roadway.
That's actually in here, that you can't have a similar business, and I can't remember the exact footage within,
That's for within the Lake Riley overlay only.
oh, is that only, okay.
Right, and just certain uses, 650 feet, I think it was, 660. You can only have certain uses within that's just Lake Wiley.
That's just Lake Wiley. Okay.
Yes.
Can we propose to expand that countywide?
What business are you? Storage units?
I'm not going to.
Some of the ones that I'm seeing.
I mean, I'm not going to. I don't want to single out any particular business like that. I mean, just the concern I've gotten in the past is, and I'll just use, stores that make widgets. Just there's too many of them. We don't need that many.
Shouldn't the market drive that, not the government?
I'm not saying it's not prohibiting it, but it's.
How did I know you were going to say that?
I'm consistent. I am consistent.
I'm just looking for some.
I'm consistent.
I'm just looking for some spacing on it so that it's not a.
My concern with that is then you run into things like gas stations, fast food, the things that do tend to pop up together that people appreciate being together sometimes when you're getting off the highway or,
Right.
And maybe there could be some exceptions around, high volume intersections for, pharmacies and gas stations and fast food that, that are normally on those types of, at those intersections.
So right now, the list contains automobile, truck, RV, boat, marine, motorcycle, and ATV service repair and customizations, car washes and detail shops, gasoline sales, restaurants with drive-through or drive-in facilities, and self-storage facilities. So those are the 5 things right now that we have listed. Mostly they're auto-oriented uses.
That can or can't be.
They cannot be located within 660 feet of each other.
But that's in Lake Wiley.
Lake Wiley overlay only.
They can't be located within 660 feet of each other.
In Lake Wiley.
So in Lake, yeah, just in that overlay area. And they're
And that was
talking
part
about,
of their Lake Wiley small area plan. That was they're getting too many of those uses together, and so we addressed that with this provision here.
that's seasonal.
I wish.
All I see is
No, it is
QT
not.
and storage facilities. QT and storage facilities.
And if I can just add too, for this one here, for the overlay, a lot of these things we're doing kind of like as a test project, see how it works out before we go countywide. So maybe just see how it works out here before we, take it further.
Do we have a motion?
Can I just say one more thing?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And I didn't see it addressed, and I am sorry I didn't read every single page of the new book. I just got it and I was in bed. But was there something that was addressed about the townhomes being backed up to a major street, the back of the townhome with aesthetics, where you see the grills and the bicycles, and it's
Some sort of
all
screening
just
or-
miles of back doors of townhomes on a major street. Was that addressed? Because we
Townhomes-
brought it up.
Townhomes in generally speaking, they changed significantly, and so therefore now they're going to require a perimeter buffer of 50 feet on the entire perimeter. So that's not there right now. So I believe because of that, that will help to address some of the areas where the buffer is much smaller. Some cases just 10 feet, 15 feet. So I think that 50-foot buffer will definitely change that.
A buffer as in,
The entire perimeter of the property, the whole perimeter.
I mean, like a
Landscape buffer.
landscape buffer. That's what I was getting. as far as, okay. All right.
Okay. So is there a way for us to vote on the changes that we wanted to see first and then send it to council, or do we have to send this whole package to council as written with our recommended changes as a suggestion?
I would say we vote on each one individually, that way we have it on record.
That was the request of staff at the inception of this meeting. If there's consensus on the itemized list you provided, you can make a motion to approve incorporating the recommended
So vote
items
on-
as you've provided.
Okay, so it looks like there's 11, just vote on each of those 11
Well, yeah, I'm
items.
saying I think you can simplify. If there's consensus to the 11 items, there may be debate, and maybe each member needs to debate them, in which case you call
I
them
think
out.
we already did that.
Yeah, you fleshed that out pretty well, is
Okay.
my point. I think you can make a motion for recommendation incorporating the recommended changes as set out, as itemized by the chair.
Okay. I'll go ahead and make that since I have all the notes here. So I would make a motion that we include these changes to the rezone recode plan that goes before council. And the first one is item 155.152, have that revert to the existing language. Item 2 would be 155.612, no administrative adjustments. Item 3, have council look into the possibility of adding willingness and capability letters from the school district for preliminary plat approval. Item 4, have preliminary plat approval stay with the Planning Commission. Item 5, 155.153, do not allow townhomes in RMX 20. Item 6, council to consider construction bonds for stormwater and other items the county may inherit. Item 7, regarding site alteration and fill buildup, limit the height of the fill buildup and reference the City of Greenville statute. Item 8, regarding the use table, add liquor stores to GC and a special exemption in neighborhood commercial. Number 9, item 154.215, regarding TIAs, council to consider having the improvements be built before the 80% fund threshold. Item 10, allow gravel roads in the rural part of the county to access residences. And item 11, have council look at chapter 153 regarding vested rights to include the language that Planning Commission may consider or may deny based on the public interest is not being adversely affected. And, yes, please.
155.152, classification of new and unlisted uses, would revert back to the current code, which says the use not expressly listed.
Right, that was the first one,
That was the first one? I missed-
151, 152,
okay, I'm
revert to
sorry.
existing language.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yep.
I thought that was another section.
Nope, that was item number 1.
I just didn't want to forget that one.
So that was a motion to recommend approval of the recode with the itemized recommended changes as specified by the chair.
Correct.
Thank you.
Do we have a second?
I will second that.
Do we have any further discussion?
Thank
All
you
in
all
favor?
for the discussion.
All right, that looks unanimous. Adoption of the Planning Commission calendar. Do we have a motion to approve the calendar?
Make a motion to
Do-
approve the calendar.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? And the tracking sheet. Any questions or comments on the tracking sheet? Motion to, well, I guess we don't really have to make a motion to approve that. We'll just. Who seconded? And do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Do we have a second? All in favor? All right, thank you, guys. That was